Hey Reddit, I'm not sure how to start this, but I guess I just need to get it out. Maybe someone out there will tell me I'm not completely insane for how I feel. My wife, Madison, and I have been married for 6 years. Before that, we dated for 4. She's always been the assertive, confident type, and I've always been, well, I guess you'd call me the quieter one. Maybe that's what drew us together, her fire and my tendency to keep the peace. But now, I'm not sure if I ever really knew her. It all started 2 months ago when Madison told me she was heading to Japan for a business trip. She works in marketing for a high-end cosmetics company, and they were launching a major campaign overseas. It wasn't her first work trip, so I didn't think much of it. But something about this trip felt different, even from the start. She seemed unusually excited. Not just the typical pre-trip jitters, but almost giddy. She talked nonstop about how amazing Japan was going to be, the food, the culture, the nightlife. I chalked it up to her enthusiasm, but now I wonder if there was something more behind it. Before she left, we had a strange conversation over dinner. Madison's a vegetarian. Has been for as long as I've known her. She's always been vocal about her lifestyle, criticizing me when I'd eat a burger or enjoy a steak. I didn't mind at first. I mean, relationships are about compromise, right? But it got to the point where I stopped eating meat altogether just to avoid her comments. Then, out of nowhere, she casually mentioned that she might try some of the local cuisine in Japan, specifically meat dishes. I was stunned. For years, she'd made me feel guilty about eating meat, and now she was planning to indulge just because it was authentic Japanese culture? I tried to ask her why she was okay with it now. You make such a big deal out of everything. That stung, but I let it go. I've always let things go with her. The week she left, everything seemed fine on the surface. She sent me texts about her flight, pictures of her hotel room, and updates about her meetings. But the messages became less frequent as the days went on. I tried not to read into it. She was probably just busy, right? Still, something gnawed at me. It wasn't until the 4th night that things started to unravel. That evening, I got a text from her around 9 p.m. her time. She mentioned she was going out with some colleagues to experience Tokyo nightlife. She sent me a selfie of her dressed up, looking stunning as always, but something about her smile felt off. I couldn't explain it, but my gut was screaming at me. I ignored it, though. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the radio silence. For the next 2 days, I barely heard from her. When she finally texted back, her responses were short and vague. Work's been crazy, she'd say, or sorry, long day. I wanted to believe her, but my anxiety was spiraling. So, I did something I'd never done before. I opened her laptop. I know, invading her privacy was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Madison's laptop was connected to her work email, and I thought maybe I'd find her itinerary or something to ease my mind. What I found instead made my stomach drop. There were emails between Madison and someone named Kaido. The messages were flirty, filled with inside jokes and emojis. One email mentioned how he couldn't wait to show her the real Tokyo, and she'd replied with a winking face and "can't wait," winky face. My hands were shaking as I read through their exchanges. This wasn't just a colleague. It was obvious they were close. Too close. The worst part? There was a photo attachment in one of the emails. It was a picture of Madison at a restaurant, holding up a skewer of what looked like grilled meat. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "Finally converted her. She's mine now, LOL." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't know what hurt more, the realization that she'd been lying to me, or the way she seemed so happy, so carefree, with someone else. I spent the rest of the night sitting in our dark living room, trying to piece together what this meant. Was she cheating on me? Or was I reading too much into this? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part was terrified of what she might say. When Madison came back a week later, she acted like everything was normal. She kissed me hello, handed me a souvenir, and started unpacking her suitcase. But I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time she smiled or laughed, I pictured her with him. I wanted to believe she was still the woman I married, but deep down, I knew something had changed. I haven't confronted her yet. I'm too afraid of what I'll find out. But I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. That's why I'm here, Reddit. I need to know. Am I overreacting? Or is my marriage already over, and I'm just the last to realize it? The days following Madison's return from Japan were some of the hardest I've ever endured. On the surface, everything seemed fine. She was her usual self, chatting about work and casually mentioning how amazing her trip had been. She even cooked one of her signature vegetarian dishes the day after she got back, as if nothing had changed. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was that email, that photo, and the way she laughed with him. I tried to convince myself that I was reading too much into things. Maybe Kaido was just a colleague. Maybe their messages were harmless. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more the doubts ate away at me. Every time her phone buzzed, my stomach twisted into knots. She'd glance at the screen, smile faintly, and put it back down without saying anything. It wasn't like her. Madison was always the type to overshare every little detail of her day, and now there was this distance. I decided I needed answers, but I wasn't sure how to get them without tipping her off. Confronting her felt too risky. What if I was wrong? What if I accused her of something she didn't do? But what if I was right, and she lied to my face? I wasn't ready for either outcome. So instead, I started paying closer attention. One evening, while she was in the shower, I noticed her phone on the nightstand. It was unlocked, and for a moment, I just stared at it, my heart racing. I'd never snooped through her phone before. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But the thought of that email haunted me, and before I could stop myself, I picked it up. I scrolled through her messages, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Most of them were the usual, text from friends, work chats, and reminders from her yoga app. But then I saw his name, Kaido. My breath caught in my throat. There weren't many messages, just a handful, but they were enough to confirm my worst fears. Can't stop thinking about last week. When can I see you again? Her reply, not sure when I'll be back in Tokyo, but I'll let you know. I had an amazing time too. Smiley face. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't have to be. The implication was clear. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I put the phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. Madison was singing in the shower, completely unaware that my world had just come crashing down. For the next few days, I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. Every time she smiled at me or kissed my cheek, I wanted to scream. How could she act so normal? Did she really think I was that clueless, or did she just not care anymore? Things came to a head the following weekend. We were at a dinner party with some friends, and Madison was the life of the evening, as always. She was laughing, telling stories, and effortlessly charming everyone in the room. I tried to play along, but I couldn't stop thinking about how fake it all felt. At one point, someone asked about her trip, and she launched into a glowing description of Tokyo. The food, the nightlife, the people. The people were amazing, she said, her eyes lighting up. I made some really great connections. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't sit there and listen to her talk about connections while knowing what she'd done. I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to pull myself together. But when I came back, I caught her texting under the table. She looked up, startled, and quickly locked her phone. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. "Just work stuff," she said, too quickly. Her tone was dismissive, like I was annoying her for even asking. That night, I barely slept. She drifted off easily, as if nothing had happened, while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I felt like a fool. All those years of bending over backward to make her happy, of compromising, of trying to be the perfect husband. And this was my reward? To be lied to, cheated on, and treated like I didn't matter? The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called my best friend, Ryan, and asked if we could meet up. Ryan's been my rock for years. He's the kind of guy who always knows what to say, and I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. We met at a coffee shop, and as soon as I saw him, the floodgates opened. I told him everything, the emails, the texts, the photo. He listened quietly, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finally finished, he let out a low whistle. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "I hate to say it, but it sounds like she's cheating on you. You need to confront her. I can't, I said, my voice breaking. What if I'm wrong? What if she denies it? What if she's making a fool out of you right now? Ryan interrupted. His words hit me like a slap. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Sitting around and pretending everything's fine isn't going to fix this. He was right, of course. But the thought of confronting Madison filled me with dread. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. And even more than that, I wasn't sure I was ready to face what came next. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind was racing. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The lies, the doubts, the constant pit in my stomach. It was all too much. But how do you confront the person you love most in the world when you're terrified they'll destroy you with their answer? When I walked through the door, Madison was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light and casual. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. Part of me wanted to blurt it all out right then and there. But instead, I just said, "Yeah, fine." Because I wasn't ready. Not yet. But I knew that moment was coming. And when it did, there would be no turning back. The days that followed were agonizing. I was trapped in this limbo of knowing but not knowing, suspecting but not confronting. Every glance Madison threw my way felt like a dagger. Every affectionate touch, every casual laugh, every kiss goodnight. They all felt fake, like poorly scripted lines in a play I didn't want to be part of anymore. I couldn't take it. The tension inside me was building like a storm, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke. But how do you prepare yourself to confront the person you love when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to run away from the truth? I decided I needed more than just suspicion. If I was going to confront Madison, I needed undeniable proof. I felt pathetic even thinking it, but I reached out to Ryan again and asked him what I should do. He hesitated at first, but eventually, he said something I hadn't considered. Hire a private investigator. The idea felt so extreme. What kind of husband hires a PI to spy on his wife? Was I really that desperate? But Ryan pointed out that if Madison was lying to me, I deserved to know the full truth. Think of it this way, he said. Either you're going to get closure, or you're going to get the confirmation you need to make the right decision. But you can't stay in this limbo forever. So, I did it. I found a local investigator, a guy named Jim who specialized in marital cases. Meeting him felt like stepping into some bad TV drama. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the type who had seen it all and didn't mince words. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady, and he nodded like this was just another day at the office. "Give me a couple of weeks," he said. "We'll see what's what." Weeks. It felt like an eternity. In the meantime, I did my best to act normal around Madison, but it was getting harder and harder. Every little thing she did set me on edge. When she went out to meet a friend, I wondered if she was really meeting Kaido. When she came home late from work, I imagined her sneaking away for a phone call or video chat. I hated myself for thinking this way, but I couldn't stop. And then, one night, something happened that nearly broke me. Madison was out with her co-workers for a team bonding dinner, or so she claimed. I was home alone, trying to distract myself with Netflix, when her laptop dinged with an email notification. I froze. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the table, glanced at the screen, and saw the name I'd been dreading, Kaido. The subject line was simple, Tokyo Memories. My hands shook as I clicked on it. The email opened, and there it was, a series of photos from their trip. Madison and Kaido at a sushi bar, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Madison laughing as he held up a bowl of ramen. Madison sitting next to him on what looked like a hotel balcony, her hair tousled, her eyes sparkling. There was nothing explicitly romantic about the pictures, but the intimacy in them was undeniable. But it was the final photo that did me in. It was a selfie of the two of them at some kind of shrine, and Madison was holding his hand. Her face was glowing, the way it used to when we first started dating. The caption read, "For luck. Miss you already." I slammed the laptop shut and collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. This was it. This was the proof I needed. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been building a connection with this man, something deeper than just a fling. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. She left it all there, like she didn't think I'd ever find out, or like she didn't care if I did. When Madison came home that night, she was all smiles, talking about how great the dinner had been. I could barely look at her. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like another lie, another insult to the life we'd built together. I excused myself to bed early, claiming I had a headache, and she didn't even question it. The next morning, I got a call from Jim. He sounded grim. "We need to talk," he said. "In person." I drove to his office, my heart pounding the entire way. When I walked in, he handed me a folder without saying a word. Inside were photos of Madison, photos of her meeting up with a man at a downtown cafe. It wasn't Kaido. It was someone else, someone I didn't recognize. They were sitting close, their heads almost touching as they talked. In one photo, she was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. In another, he was handing her a small, wrapped box. She looked delighted. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "From what I can tell," Jim said, "this guy is local. They've met up a few times. I don't have a name yet, but it looks like this isn't just a one-off thing." I felt like I was going to be sick. Kaido was bad enough, but now there was someone else? How many lies had she told me? How long had this been going on? When I got home, Madison was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How do you tell someone you've caught them in their lies? How do you confront someone who's betrayed you in ways you can't even comprehend? "Fine," I finally muttered, walking past her to the bedroom. I needed more time, more evidence, more strength to face her. But deep down, I knew the confrontation was inevitable. The only question was how much more I could take before everything fell apart. After seeing the photos Jim gave me, my world felt even more surreal. There was now a second man? How could Madison possibly juggle so many lies? I wanted to believe there was some sort of misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew the truth was staring me in the face. She wasn't the woman I thought I'd married, and it felt like every interaction we had now was part of some elaborate act to keep me blind. That evening, Madison suggested we have a date night. She said it had been a while since we'd spent quality time together, and she thought it would be good for us. Her suggestion caught me off guard. After everything I discovered, I couldn't fathom how she could sit there, smiling at me, and pretend nothing was wrong. But I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. I wanted to see if she'd slip up, if she'd let anything slip that would confirm my suspicions even further. We went to one of our favorite Italian restaurants. The atmosphere was cozy, intimate, exactly the kind of place we used to love. Madison looked stunning as always, her makeup flawless, her hair perfectly styled. She chatted away about work, the recent drama with her colleagues, and a new series she'd started watching. I played along, nodding and asking questions, but I wasn't really listening. All I could think about were those photos. At one point, I asked her about her day. She hesitated, just for a split second, before launching into a story about a client meeting. That hesitation was like a crack in the mask she'd been wearing. I wondered if she could feel me watching her more closely than usual. I didn't let up, casually steering the conversation toward her team bonding dinner from a few nights ago. "Who was there?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Anyone I'd know?" She waved it off, listing a few co-workers' names, none of which rang a bell. "It wasn't that exciting," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "Mostly just shop talk." Her lies were so smooth, so effortless. But I knew better now. I smiled and changed the subject, pretending to be as oblivious as she probably hoped I was. When we got home, Madison suggested watching a movie together. I agreed, even though I felt like I was going to explode inside. As she scrolled through Netflix, laughing at the terrible movie descriptions, I couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. Did she feel even a shred of guilt for what she was doing? Or was I just another piece in her carefully crafted puzzle? As the movie played, I excused myself to the kitchen and grabbed her phone from the counter. She'd left it unlocked, and I didn't hesitate this time. My hands were steady as I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing new from Kaido, but there was a fresh string of texts from an unsaved number. The messages were from the man in the photos. Him. Did you like the gift? Can't wait to see you again. Madison. It was perfect. You always know exactly what I need. Smiley face. Him. When can we meet next? I miss you. Madison. Soon. I just need to figure out my schedule. You're amazing. I felt the blood drain from my face. The casual intimacy of their conversation made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. She was carrying on an entire other relationship, maybe two, and here I was, sitting on the couch with her like a fool. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and returned to the living room. She smiled at me as I sat down, completely unaware of what I'd just seen. I felt like I was going to be sick. How could she be so brazen, so cruel? That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. But I still didn't know how to confront her, how to rip the Band-Aid off and face the inevitable fallout. The next morning, I called Jim again. Can you find out who this second guy is? I asked. He agreed to look into it, and I knew that once I had a name, there'd be no turning back. Meanwhile, Madison's behavior began to shift. She started acting more affectionate, almost overly so. She'd make me breakfast before work, kiss me more often, and even started suggesting we go on weekend getaways. At first, I wondered if she could sense that I knew something, but then I realized what it really was: guilt. She wasn't trying to fix things. She was trying to keep me distracted. But no amount of her affection could erase what I knew. As I waited for Jim's next update, I started preparing myself for the confrontation. I didn't know what I was going to say or how she would react, but I knew one thing for certain. The Madison I thought I knew was gone, and I was about to meet the person she'd been hiding all along. I didn't have to wait long for Jim's next update. A few days later, he called me, his voice as steady and clinical as ever. I've got a name, he said. The guy you saw in the photos? His name's Eric. He's a local architect. From what I've gathered, they've been meeting up on and off for at least 6 months. 6 months. My heart sank. That was long before her trip to Japan, which meant Kaido wasn't just some random fling. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a pattern. How many others had there been? How long had I been living in the dark while she carried on with her double life? Jim emailed me a full report, complete with timestamps, photos, and even a summary of Eric's background. He was good-looking, successful, and of course, single. They'd met at various places, cafes, parks, even a fancy wine bar I didn't recognize. The photos showed them sitting close, laughing, and, in one particularly painful image, holding hands across the table. I sat at my computer for hours, staring at the evidence. My emotions swung wildly between rage, sadness, and a sickening sense of humiliation. Madison had been lying to me for months, maybe years, and I had been so blind, so trusting. I didn't even know who she was anymore. That evening, Madison came home later than usual. She had texted earlier to say she was stuck at the office, but now I couldn't help but wonder if she'd been with Eric. When she walked through the door, she looked exhausted, but there was a lightness to her that I couldn't ignore. It was the same glow I'd seen in the photos, the same glow she used to have when she was with me. How was work? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged, kicking off her heels. Same old, just a long day. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek, her lips warm and soft against my skin. What about you? How was your day? I wanted to scream at her, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But instead, I just smiled weakly and said, it was fine. Madison went to shower, and I sat there on the couch, my fists clenched. I couldn't keep doing this. The lies were suffocating me, and every moment I spent pretending like everything was fine felt like a betrayal of myself. I needed to confront her, but I still didn't know how. What would I even say? Would she deny it? Would she cry? Would she turn it around on me, like she always did when we argued? That night, I barely slept. Madison curled up next to me, her breathing soft and even, while my mind raced. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Eric, laughing, holding his hand, looking at him the way she used to look at me. It was unbearable. The next morning, as Madison got ready for work, I watched her closely.